Welcome. I'm Daniel.
And I'm Chris.
This is the Dirty God Podcast.
In a world that's pain and gray, we search for brighter days. Questions right.
Well, welcome back, everybody. This is our third episode. I thank you so much for your participation and how we've seen everybody commenting in the live streams on the chat. It's been very interesting. We do again want to apologize for the first week. We had some problems with the subtitles there, but those are now out of the way, so we should be getting different messages here on the third. I imagine actually on the second. We do record these episodes before we release them. So the second episode, Daniel, is about to drop. This is the Sunday before the second episode drops. So we're going to have a trial and error there if we're going to have English and Spanish chat. But just want to kind of let everybody back into the loop of our thought process because, well, you know, our thought processes are long and sometimes we forget. It's been a week since we've heard it, so I might not remember. I don't know about you, Daniel, but I'm about to hit 40, and sometimes, you know, weekly programs like this, I get lost in the maze. So, we were talking about last time.
The struggle is real.
The struggle is real, my brother. It's true. It's true. I've got more white hairs than color hair in my beard. My children call me Grandpa, so it's what it is, man. We were talking about power and abuse of power in systemic structures, right? And last week we talked about Dianne Langberg. I just want to put parentheses, and you can check down in the bottom. Here I'm going to put links to her books, both in English and in Spanish, and tag her. I read her citation, and I didn't tell you guys who she is. She's actually a clinical psychologist that's Presbyterian, and she mostly dealt with, if you'll remember the quote, it was from Adolf Hitler. She mostly dealt with people who were dealing from trauma from the Second World War. But then she moved on to a Christian practice and found out the same type, Daniel, the same type of trauma that Germans or Jews experienced in the Second World War with the propaganda machine from Adolf Hitler and the abuse of power that was there. They suffered that at church, right? So we were talking about how there are different ways to use power in church. There are correct ways and incorrect ways. And we talked about 4 different ways that people exclude us. Miroslav Volf talks about this in Embracing and Exclusion. We talked about 4 different ways that people get excluded or people get marginalized or get thrown out directly. And listening to a bit of Daniel's story, how he had this experience, of coming out, as it were, to not knowing if he believes what he was taught all his life, and the ramifications that caused not only in the systemic denominational structure of which he was a part, but also in his family. Now, there are several different ways in which someone deconstructs, we said. And we wanted to talk about in this episode a different way that someone deconstructs. These last 2 episodes, we've been talking about the denominational structures or human constructs. And we've also talked about the abuse of power. But, Daniel, there's other ways that people deconstruct as well. One major points to that is perhaps when what I believe in perhaps isn't the truth, or I start doubting that what I've been taught is correct, right? So in seminary, we actively challenge these type of things. So not to be controversial, but to see if we really believe what we say we believe, right? So you had an experience you were telling me about where you had a little bit of conflict with what you believed
Yeah,
and what you were taught. Just tell us a little more about that.
right. Yeah, so, one of the major features of deconstruction is, and of reconstruction, because I guess for me, I kind of talk about deconstruction on the other side of it. So this for me was part of the whole process, was going through this, unpacking it, and then, putting it back together and deciding what was different, what I didn't believe anymore, what I didn't think was truth, or, what I believe, but I believe it like somewhat differently, if you will. So one of the major features of that process is dealing with the beliefs that have changed. And I mentioned in the previous episode, one of the previous episodes, that it is like coming out, because there's a couple of big doctrines in my tradition that it's almost heresy to disagree with. And so three major beliefs changed for me during deconstruction. My beliefs about the end of the world changed. And it was in this order as well. My beliefs about the end of the world changed. My beliefs about the Bible changed, and my beliefs about the afterlife changed. And so all three of those things kind of happened and sort of happened in that order. But first, and you were talking about systems of power, the first one was beliefs about the end of the world, because in the tradition I grew up in, teachings about the end of the world were kind of central to what we believed as a church. In Pentecostal theology, the early Pentecostals, one of the things they believed is that this was like an end time revival, that this outpouring of the Spirit was signifying the rapture,
The latter rain.
that the end of the world was coming. Yes, the latter rain spoken of in Joel. So they kind of saw it as that. And so, I mean, my whole life I grew up hearing evangelists say things like prophesying, this generation's going to have the last big revival. In fact, Kenneth Hagin is still doing it. I saw it just the other day. He was preaching at a church, and his message was, the greatest end time revival we've ever seen is taking place. And in this generation, it's always in this generation. So anyway,
Kind of hard for
so
it to
coming
exist
out
in other generations when you don't live in other generations, right?
right. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Especially when you need the money from this generation.
Right. That's important too.
But yeah, I think my changing about beliefs about the end of the world was tough on a couple of fronts. It was tough because it is sort of a central belief, at least in the 80s and early 90s. It was a real big deal in church. I mean, we had prophecy conferences and charts across the board. And my dad taught it. My dad was a prophecy teacher. My dad knew that stuff inside and out. So I grew up knowing it. Like, it was taught to me, at a young age. I grew up knowing it. And, he had all the charts and everything. So it was very hard for me to say, I just don't buy that anymore. Anyway, I wrote a blog on it, and it was one of the most popular ones I've done. It was amazing how much my story resonated with so many other people, that this feature of their upbringing in Pentecostalism or evangelicalism during that time period, one of the major pieces of them breaking from the church was they just no longer bought the ideas they were selling about the end of the world.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole bunch of people out there that feel this way, and we're traumatized by it. I don't know if your church did it or not, because you were Baptist, I guess, in at this time in the 80s and 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So we watched movies and everything.
I read all of
terrifying.
the Left Behind books. I'm sorry to talk over you. I read all the Left
ahead.
Behind books. I read them all. And when they started doing the movies, I was so excited. And then they just, I don't know if they ran out of funds or interest or both or what happened. Couldn't afford Kirk Cameron anymore. And so I don't know. But yeah, absolutely. That was a part of my upbringing.
Yeah, and so it was really scary, like, growing up. And I don't fault my parents for it or anything. There was just a lot of spiritual fervor at that time in Pentecostalism. It was like the tail end of the tent revivals. It was the Reagan era. It was a surge of conservatism, the moral majority
Right.
was becoming a big deal at the time. Televangelism was really taking off with cable TV, and so people like Jack Van Impe, John Hagee, who I'm sure you are familiar with.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, like it was really traumatizing, a lot of it, because, and I don't blame my parents for it. It was very proliferated in the church culture at the time. You know, it was Reagan era, rise of conservatism, the moral majority was a big deal. Televangelism was becoming a big thing with cable. So you had like Jack Van Impe, John Hagee, it was just proliferated. It was and so as a child, I would be outside playing by myself and have a bad thought or something, or like, throw a fake grenade because I'm imaginary army playing and say a cuss word or something. And I would think, oh no, the rapture might have happened. And I would run into the house to see if my parents were still there. And I remember that as like and I had nightmares. But I mean, they did not shelter us from that stuff at all. Luckily, they didn't show us the movies at my church. I did see the movies later on when I was an older young adult, but I didn't watch any of the Thief in the Night movies or anything like that. At any rate, so I thought we could talk about that in this episode because I found that that's a topic that a lot of people in our generation, if I dare say, who have experienced this and who have wrestled with it and who don't know if they believe anymore whether one day a trumpet's going to sound and people are just going to poof and disappear and leave their underpants behind.
Right.
Yeah, so let's talk about it. We might need to define the kind of eschatology we're talking about. We might need to define eschatology. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we do. Just before I do that, though, I would like to say I owned a shirt that said, "In case of rapture, you can have my shirt." That's what it said, and it had like smoke, the shirt falling on the back of it.
Love it, man.
Right? I mean I mean, we're not talking about something that wasn't. When Daniel says prolific, I think it's still prolific to this day. I mean,
Yeah.
I can talk to you about, Jimmy Swaggart Network. When you're listening on the radio, Jimmy Swaggart recently passed away. But somebody who's still doing prophecy conferences is Perry Stone. He's a big guy in Cleveland with the Omega
Yes.
Center. And he used to be
Also
part
had
of
a
our
scandal.
denomination. Also had a scandal,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
But absolutely, eschatology comes from two Greek words, logos, which obviously means, for our purposes, means study. I'm sure we'll get to that in some point, or all the other things that it means as well. But for our purposes, it means study, and eschaton, which is the last things. So it's the study of the last things. It's basically the study of how the world ends. And there are various theories, Daniel, on how the world ends. And so just so we're on the same page and nobody gets lost, we're Pentecostal, but different Pentecostal brands have different Pentecostal beliefs. Most of them, however, and I would say that most evangelical churches, not even Pentecostal, most evangelical churches fall in the category of what's called premillennialism, right? So this idea that Christ will come back physically to destroy evil and reign on the earth for 1,000 years. That's what it means, premillennialism. It means that Christ's coming is before the literal millennial reign, right? So I don't know if you want to go into any other types there, Daniel, or not, but that's premillennialism. Would you like to illuminate us on some other points of view?
Well, suffice to say that with everything in Christianity over 2,000 years, there's a lot of different variations on it, right? So, have fun with that. Google, ChatGPT, go down the wormhole, YouTube, just like my grandpa used to say, don't believe anything you hear and only half of what you see.
Right.
But So yeah, so there's like, there's anti-millennialism, there's post-millennialism, there's amillennialism, there's premillennialism. There's people like me that are like millennialism. That's the way I would define mine.
The don't care
Is like,
millennialism.
yeah, I just don't like, if there's going
Really
to
the
be
same
one, I
thing.
want to be there for it. Yeah, well, I'm glad I'm invited to the party. Okay, let's throw it.
Right.
Like, I don't know when it's happening. Just get me there.
Right.
So, but I want to say this. This to me, I guess everybody's different, but this to me is one of the most important beliefs that affects the ethics and the morals of the church, because what you believe about how things end directly impacts the way you act right now.
Right.
And that is where the break happened for me, because, well, two things kind of happened. One of them was I did a Bible study at my first church. I was 20 something years old, and I decided I'm going to teach Revelation, and I did it. And you did the whole end of the world thing, literal frogs coming out of the sea, all this stuff.
Those locusts
Got done
are
with
fun.
it.
With the woman's hair and the sharp teeth and the
Oh,
breastplate.
dude, that was the most terrifying part of the tribulation for me. I was more scared of that than anything.
Yeah.
Like the decapitations, nothing. And I would constantly ask my dad to describe them again, because I wanted to be acutely aware if they were coming at me, so that I would know, like, I had missed the rapture.
He's like starting to invent anti-locust rapture, anti-apocalyptic locust spray repellent. Right.
Man, those things scared the bejesus out of me, man.
Scorpion's tails. They had
Yeah, then
scorpion's
they would
tails
sting
as
you.
well.
Yeah, and you would beg to die, but you wouldn't be able to die. That was the worst part, is like you would be hurting but couldn't die. But anyway, I did all that. I did the timeline, all of that. But it was like, the process was hard for me because it wasn't adding up. I was like, the math isn't mathing. I'm doing a whole lot of gymnastics. And listen, I believe the Bible isn't something that can always be read plainly and simply. On the other hand, I don't think you should have to have a theological degree to be able to understand some of the concepts. And out of all the concepts, the end of the world one took you going from this verse to that verse to this verse to that verse, saying this one's happening here and this one's happening here. I got done and I was like, I don't know what the heck that was, but I'm never teaching it again. And even though I knew it inside and out. But the second thing that really got me was I just started thinking about how it plays out. And it plays out with God basically taking the Christians away, killing everybody else, burning the world down, and starting again. And to even get to that point, like mass mayhem, Armageddon, and all this kind of stuff. And I began to see how that affected things like environmentalism. It's like, well, why take care of the earth? God's going to burn it all down one day. Well, who cares about fracking? Or, yeah, exactly. Yeah, who cares about it? Like, God's going to, he's going to burn it down. And then in terms of war, like, how can you have an anti-war ethic if the goal of God's plan is to have the biggest war ever, where everybody pretty much kills everybody and there's blood up to the horse's bridle? Like, is this really the Prince of Peace? That this is how we go out, with a big violent bang that he's kind of in charge of. So yeah, that's where it began to break down for me, and I think that's why it's important. So yes, premillennialism, but then more particularly dispensationalism, but that's kind of my experience of it.
Right. It makes for a great novel, I'll tell you that. It's a page turn you cannot stop. I mean,
Someone should write that.
It was like, and this may get me kicked out of the Church of God, but it was like, I started with, I can't remember which one was first, Daniel. I can't remember if I did the Lord of the Rings trilogy first, or I did the Left Behind series first. One came before the other, and then the Harry Potter books. But that was my repertoire of reading since I was like 8, right? And so you get wrapped up in these things, and you have these major proponents. Like, if this were just novel series, right? That's one thing. That's their interpretation. So you have another one that caused a big revolt was The Cabin. I don't know if you read that book or
Yeah. My wife has read it. Yeah, my wife has read it, and I know the ins and outs of the story, and I've
I
seen
bawled
clips of the
my eyes
movie.
out in that book, dude. But if it's just
I
like
can see why.
if it's just like a novel, that's one thing. But I mean, you have like all of the pastors that are on TV, that are on radio, all the pastors of the largest congregations are supporting this one view. And if our audience is unaware, this one view for theology is very, very recent. Like the main view for most of Christian history was post millennium. Like we're going to get to a point where we advance, especially in the Renaissance and the Illumination periods when we're talking modern times. Post millennialism was, I mean, that's all that was taught, right? So it was like we're going to get to a place where we create world peace, and that will be the church's millennium. And this is symbolic, right? This is God reigning over the earth, but through the church, right? And that was even in medieval times, that's Catholic view, right? Before we talk about Reform and Renaissance, that's Catholic view. I mean, the Pope reigns over the kings. The kings need somebody over them to keep them in check. And who has them in check? God, right? And who is God? Well, for the entire world, I forget how you say this in English, the vicary of Christ, which is the Pope, right? So
Right.
postmillennialism was the major thought process for eschatology before we have premillennialism, which isn't invented by dispensationalism, but it is majorly propagated. So, Daniel, if you'll indulge me in 2 seconds of being a seminary teacher, I'll just kind of give a rundown here of how premillennialism takes over postmillennialism and how it becomes a major belief, especially during the world wars and the idea of the great missionary movement, right? As you
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
premillennialism, not just for our denomination, but for the missionary movement, eschatology is one of the major proponents. Premillennialism in eschatology is one of the major proponents for mass missionary movement, right? So how does it
Right.
start, right? Well, the type of premillennialism we're talking about here is a dispensationalist premillennialism. So the audience knows these are two separate things. They are not the same. They are not synonyms. So Daniel's a don't care millennialist, and I'm a premillennialist. I'm still a premillennialist, but I'm not a dispensationalist. Okay, and so what happened was basically we have this fellow that's very renowned in the theological community, still is. Like if you go to Logos Software or you're on eSword or any kind of Blue Letter Bible, you'll get the John Nelson Darby commentary, right? And John Nelson Darby was from England. He lived in the Illumination period. Things that were around him were battling against this idea of what the Bible teaches. So he's got modernism, where science, Darwinism is in its mass age. Darwinism is kind of going backwards at this point, but what John Nelson Darby does is basically say, okay, we're not going to listen to what the world has to say. We're not going to listen to philosophy. We're not going to listen to science. We're going to create certain fundamentals that every Christian should believe. Now, to call someone a fundamentalist today means that they're conservative, basically. But there literally was a group called the fundamentalists, and they're based off of 13 fundamentals that John Nelson Darby created. There was actually a magazine publication. You can look this up online. It's not something I'm making this up. You look up fundamentalists on Wikipedia and see John Nelson Darby in there. And what were the things that they were trying to do? Well, during modernism and on the theological part, not just the scientific secular part, in theology we have symbolic interpretation, metaphors being placed where one of the fundamentals of fundamentalism was the literal interpretation of the Bible. So we have Darwinism in the secular world, and then we have Wellhausen with the documentary theory, or I forget its other name. It's high criticism. Okay, so and since we're in modernism, one of the main pillars of modernism is positivism. We think that because we have all of these advances in science and all of these advances in knowledge, that we're going to be able to solve all of the problems of humanity with our brains, right? So,
Right. Yep.
on a theological side, if we are able to solve all the problems, then some of the problems we're going to have to solve are spiritual, right? So we want Jesus. Jesus said this, right? We're not trying to be anti-Bible. Jesus said that his kingdom come, his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So, and wasn't it the Great Commission that taught us to go to all nations, baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, and teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded? So if we do that, then Jesus will come. But Jesus comes after we have done so. Okay, so John Nelson Darby at this time is seeing some problems within the church, and at the same time we have revivalism starting, which is a whole other thing into itself. But he loves revivalism, and this is part of the Second Great Awakening, where people are starting to have sort of fits. They start moaning, they start crying. People have never seen this in preaching. The preaching styles are different. And one of the most famous Scottish preachers that had this pre-Pentecostal but Pentecostal style of preaching was Edward Irving. And John Nelson Darby decides, well, I'm going to go listen to him. He was in Scotland and England, or, well, it's just North England. Oh, I am so sorry. All of my Scottish friends will kill me for that. But it's in the northern part of the English Isles. I don't know how to say that politically correct so my Scottish friends don't hate me. But it's part of the United Kingdom. Okay. However, he goes to Scotland, right, to hear Edward Irving. And while he's there, people start having these fits. And a girl that was 16 years old by the name of Margaret MacDonald, this was in 1830, starts to prophesy. And she formulates this prophecy of a secret rapture. Okay? What is a secret rapture? Well, it's what we're talking about. It's this: if all of a sudden everyone disappears and nobody knows what happened,
Poof,
we're gone, right? So
planes
everybody
falling from the
thinks it was
sky,
aliens.
buses crashing. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, people today that believe in this, right? They start seeing what NASA's reporting, what the government's reporting, that aliens could perhaps exist, that they have files and all that. This is just the preamble to Jesus coming back, because now we know that aliens exist. So they're going to we're going to have this secret rapture because Jesus' return is imminent, and they're going to think it was aliens, and we know the truth, right? Well, the
Right.
truth is, it was a 16-year-old girl who decided that she heard from the Holy Spirit and spoke. Now, there's a problem with this. There is no secret rapture in the entirety of the Bible. So, it depends on your vision if you accept this or not, right? So, I'm Wesleyan, right? And John Wesley was famous for having the Wesleyan quadrilateral. The Wesleyan quadrilateral are the 4 points through which we make our worldview. First is the Bible, then is tradition, or if you want to call it church history, then you have reason, then you have experience. Well, what happens here is we take this experience of the prophecy of Margaret MacDonald over the precedence of the Bible, which is the highest authority. So Darby then has a preaching tour in the United States where Cyrus Ingerson Schofield hears him. You might know him as C.I. Schofield, or just the Schofield Reference Bible. And what Schofield does is basically thank you very much. There we go. It's right there on the screen. I'm not making it up. Thanks for your support there, Daniel. That's some good editing live. He goes and he preaches in the United States, and Schofield hears him. And for Schofield said the deepest theologian of our time is Darby, right? Because he starts talking about all of these things are very complicated. The way you have to make this work, like what you were talking about, you had to make this work. I mean, if you guys were to see the first chart that comes out, and the first chart that comes out, Daniel, is by Schofield, right? And it's from a booklet that he wrote called Rightly Dividing the Word of Truth, right? And it has these 7 dispensations. Okay, this is why it's called dispensationalism. Dispensations mean administration. God has certain governments over certain time periods. Now, just on the face of that, Daniel, I'm sorry I'm taking over the episode, but this is very important for our listeners to understand.
I just want to say, so I just want to take a pause here and say this is actually really good because I didn't know all that background. I knew the emergence of this was from Darby and Schofield. I did not realize that this prophecy had happened with this girl. That's actually news to me, so I'm enjoying this. I really appreciate you saying it. And I want you to continue explaining. I think you're going to get there, but like even the math doesn't math, right? Like it's not only the fact that this secret rapture isn't in the Bible. The math they're using from a prophecy in the book of Daniel is it doesn't math unless you add some errors in or add an error in. So anyway, no, please continue. I like this. This is good.
Yeah, we're going to talk about.
I'm going to put up that chart. I found the chart, so I'm going to put it up.
Okay, put it up. Put it up. We got it. Rightly dividing the word. We have 7 dispensations before the coming of Christ, right? And it's basically different governments. Dispensations mean administrations or governments, and that's it right there. And you can see a new one of it from John Hagee's The Fourth Reich. It's basically the same thing, the coming Fourth Reich, but it's in color. And they're all the same. It's just rehashed. And basically, this pamphlet that he writes, it says that God governed over Adam and Eve in a certain way. Then he governed over Noah in a certain way. Then he governed over Moses in a certain way. Then he governed over the disciples in a certain way. And then he governs over the church in a certain way. Then he will take the church out and he will govern over the world in a different way. And then he will destroy everything, all of the world, and we will return to the earth for 1,000 years for Satan to be loosed and make us confused. And then we're going to have the war of Gog and Magog, and God's going to basically blow up the universe, kind of Halo-ish style. That's right. So if you
and that's the millennial, in that belief, like that 1,000-year period, that's the millennial.
Right. So we have problems with this because most of the people that believe in this theory, they take out giant chunks of the Bible. Why? Because there are two types of Israel, and all of this is hinged upon this. There are two Israels. There's a physical Israel and there's a spiritual Israel, right? That's the big hinge to make all of this work. And I don't know if you knew that when you were 20, but that's how this works. Two Israel.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that emerged for me too that made me start doubting the whole system, because it was a very hyper focus on Israel for one thing, and the other. And I noticed this like early on. I don't know if it's discernment or what, but like I had people in my church that were really into giving to the John Hagee's Ministry to Israel thing, which at the time was raising money to get Jews back to Israel so that Jesus could come back, right?
Yeah.
But it's really strange how all that works, because a lot of that money I don't think actually went to Israel, for one thing. And
a lot of that money went to the ground.
Those charts, man, I'm telling you.
That
wow.
could have been cheap, man.
What do you call a chart maker? A map maker's a cartographer, a chartographer. I don't know. But yeah, they had to hire somebody to put those out, publish those out. But I don't know. This is a sidebar. If you want to include it, you can or not. But it's interesting. My former supervisor, that was my CEO, who wrote that book, Relationships Over Rules, he went on John Hagee's show. He was on the Hagee show, and he came to church. A big part of his story is how he converted from Judaism and became a Christian. And that really affects his theology. He has an amazing testimony of how that happened. But when he got to John Hagee's thing, before he did the interview on his show, he was told, do not tell people you're a Jew and do not talk about your conversion from Judaism. So they did not want, because they're the face of that multi-million-dollar ministry to Israel, they did not want it said on their show that someone converted from Judaism to Christianity, or to even talk about the problems he had in Judaism, and why he converted, because he basically deconstructed Judaism and became a Christian. And
well, I mean, you have to if you're going to convert.
Yeah, a little interesting sidebar. Yeah, in some ways, and that's a little asterisk too, that's what Paul's doing. Paul is thinking through the deconstruction and reconstruction under the Messiah. But anyway, I don't want to get on that rabbit trail. So definitely has those problems in it, and with it. But yeah, that's the millennial reign, and then you have the Gog and Magog thing, and then Satan gets thrown into the lake of fire, right, for eternity.
Even hell.
That's kind of the climax.
Satan, hell, the tomb.
That's right. The whole thing.
The whole thing gets thrown into the lake of fire, and that's something we'll talk about perhaps on the next episode, if hell is destroyed or not. But
to hell with hell.
Right.
That's what I say.
Amen. The problem with this theory, there are several problems with this theory. Yes. I'm going to tell you my first and major problem, and then I'm going to stop talking and let you talk a little bit more, because I think I've talked for over 30 minutes now. My first problem is, in Hebrews, God says, I'm God and I change not, nor is there shadow of variation in me. And here we not only have God changing, but when you start looking at the dispensations, there's law, there's you have to separate law and grace, and law is replaced by grace, but then grace is replaced by the law, and that for me was a problem, because what was the law for Adam and Eve? Now I understand what the Bible is saying when it says where there is no law, that there is no punishment. But the sin still reigned and death still reigned until Moses. Well, what was the law? There was a law. There was a law. Don't eat of this tree, or this will happen to you, and these are the consequences. Now, that definitely sounds like the law to me. I mean, if I'm putting in a rule for my children, I'm saying, I'm not causing it, but I am telling them, hey, your mom's cooking a pie. Don't touch the oven. You will get burnt. Right?
Right.
And that's what happens, right? So I'm telling you, don't do this. How are Adam and Eve sinful? This is the age of innocence. Okay, here's what they have. They have a choice. They have a choice to believe in what God says or not, right? And God said, don't, or this will happen. They did, and it happened. But in the middle of that law, we have grace. Because it's not as if God didn't know it happened. I mean, one of the most interesting things for me is that God comes looking for them, right? Like,
right.
I mean, he calls Adam by name, even though he knows what has already happened. And it's not like he's lost Adam. He knows exactly where he is. He gives him the opportunity to come back to God. And who is it that covers Adam? Well, Adam tries with all his might to cover himself, but he can't. So God makes the first sacrifice. And so I see grace there because he covers them with skins.
Yeah.
And there is remission of sins because there is shedding of blood, right? And so the first to do sacrifices, and this is why, I don't want to go into Pentateuch. I teach Pentateuch a lot, but that's why Cain's offering's not accepted, because there's no shedding of blood, and they already have the format given to them by God, right? Like, so Adam and Eve were covered by skins from animals, and they shed blood. Abel shed blood, as God had shown them how to be at least in communion with God, even though they weren't in his presence, right? And so Cain did the same thing. It's just another story saying the same thing. He gives them fruit. Adam and Eve tried to cover themselves with fruit leaves, fig leaves. Cain offers fruit. Well, the fruit and the fig leaves, they're man's works. By works, no man is made righteous, right? It is only by the shedding of blood. And so this is like a reinforcement of, and you're going to see this through the line as well. This is a reinforcement of this a theory that runs throughout the entirety of the Bible. So I can't separate grace from the law. The second thing is, I can't separate Israel from Israel. I mean, and this is, and I don't know if you want to go down this or not, but this is where Zionism and Christianism starts. It's like, if you're not a Zionist, you're not Christian. And I think you responded to that on one of our teasers. Somebody had asked, what were your social justice stance? And you were talking about Palestine, and most people in Palestine are Christian. And there's this terrorist group, Hamas, that causes the problems between Palestine and Israel. Well, if you're a good Christian, you're always going to be on the side of Israel. Hold on, wait a second. Okay, if I go as a Christian to the Wailing Wall and start to preach Jesus, what's going to happen to me?
It's not going to be good. They don't even like you there. I've been there. They hate the tourists and the Christians being there.
Right. So I've also been in a synagogue, which I was thrown out of. I was learning Hebrew in the synagogue, and I had been going there for 3 months, and then I asked if I could go to a service on the Sabbath service. And my teacher said, "Sure, there should be no problem." And I got there, and I was observing Sabbath law, but because of well, in Argentina, there's a whole backstory behind this, but they have security checkpoints before any synagogue, and they asked me for my identification. Well, according to Sabbath law, I can't carry anything. And so I have my kippah on. I've got my tzitzits on, right? That's it. I mean, I was wearing clothes as well, just so everybody knows. But small.
If
small
not, I know why you
detail.
were kicked out. It makes
Right.
sense.
I'm not. And then they let me in. But then after that, the Monday afterwards, they said I'm no longer to be there, and I sent them scripture. Not from the not from the New Testament. If anyone wants to convert to Judaism, and I'm talking Mount Sinai here, there is one Lord over them. So it's like, hey guys, you guys remember your own law? Anyways, I can't separate the two Israels. There is a state, a national, geographical state of Israel, right? Now, who are God's chosen people?
Are you asking me, or is this rhetorical?
I'm pausing dramatic.
God's chosen people are those in the Messiah.
Exactly. And so we know how this is going to turn out, but for Jew and Gentile, and Paul is emphatic in this in Romans 9 through 11, and he starts in Romans 3 actually. But talking about there's no difference. Galatians 3 tells us there's no difference between Jew and Gentile. Okay, so I mean, if you're believing even in this whole literal interpretation of the Bible, okay, literally Paul says we are one if you are in Christ. Okay. Literally, he says there's no difference between the Jew and the Gentile. So why are most Christians Zionists? Well, it's because of dispensationalism. And 3, and final, and this is my 3-point sermon, Daniel, that I'm giving for today. This will be my final point. So you can, if you don't mind, to go get the offering plates, and we're going to start some worship music in
Venmo
here.
up.
Put in the Newsboys, we believe. My 3rd point is, when you believe in dispensationalism, a lot of the Bible isn't for you. Like, I'm talking about almost the entirety of the Old Testament. I mean, anytime I teach church government, for example, why do we say that our law and practice will be of the New Testament? Where did the law and the practice of the New Testament come from? You think they just made it up?
Right.
I mean, no. You look at the synagogues, and you're going to find
it's
out.
in continuity.
Our local church is a synagogue. I mean, that's just what there is. And so Scofield does this chart, and his major point was this. The liberals that are saying we should not read the Bible literally are trying to take away biblical doctrine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make most theology schools at that time were liberal. And that's when we have Bultmann and I forget the other major German guy that Bonhoeffer's again.
Moltmann.
And so we have these major theological think tanks that are going liberal, and Darby and Scofield come together and they say, no, we're not having it. We're going back to conservatism. We're going back to a literal interpretation of the word. And his great project was his reference study Bible that was first published in 1909, right? And what does he propose? He proposes that his study Bible replace, excuse me, I'm thinking Spanish, replace the theological study, right? So in most of America, the Americans can't afford theological study unless you live in the Northeast, and they're all liberals. So what happens is we have these study Bibles that are distributed massively along with these charts around the same time that Pentecostalism is born. And so Pentecostalism is, I mean, it's basically it's basically we are the poor ignorant that have found the power of God. And if you offer us a tool of education, we're not anti-education, but the tool that you offer us is that Scofield started to call himself C.I. Scofield D.D. Now, what does D.D. mean? Doctor of Divinity.
Divinity.
We have no record of any kind of doctoral studies that Scofield took in any kind of theological school. And that's when our Bible schools start popping up everywhere. Like they would teach what Scofield taught, right? So you break this stuff down. You say, okay, what's law in the Age of Innocence? What's law in the Noahic era? What's law in the Mosaic era, right? So this all happens, all of this happens because one little girl in Scotland said she received a vision from God that you can't find in the Bible. I mean, Jesus literally says, every eye will see. How is it that nobody noticed where Jesus was? Right. You read the scriptures, they see him and they hide from him and ask the mountains to fall on them as they see the wonders of the Lamb that is sitting on the throne in Revelation. I mean, that's a literal interpretation, okay?
Literal interpretation, right.
Right.
Which is what this is claiming to be from, right? Like literalism is a reaction to the Enlightenment, to modernism, and all that kind of thing. So working back from the Scofield Bible, and thank you for that. That's a good summary, very good summary of that, and a lot of that I didn't know. The ironic thing is that the version of dispensationalism presented in the Scofield Bible is also cessationist, which believes that God, which teaches that, you know, there is no prophecy or tongues or anything like that. So this is kind of where things get, you know, where this is the Dirty God podcast. This is where things get murky. This is where things get dirty and messy in the Restoration Movement's theology, which you articulated so well. The JWs, the Adventists, and even the Pentecostals, we're in that same time period. And we all have this same idea of restoring the original church, right? Like picking up at Pentecost and doing the next thing. You know, the Mormons were going out building temples. We were out getting filled with the Holy Spirit and speaking in tongues. So, and even glossolalia is in some branches of Mormonism. But at any rate, the Scofield Bible is cessationist. So funny story, when I was ordained in the Church of God, I went down, and me and my friend, we were getting ordained together. And they bring us down to the front to do the ordination ceremony. And at the end of the ordination ceremony, they hand us all a Bible with our name printed on it as like a gift, as a memento. And the Bible they gave us was the Scofield Bible. And my friend and I both kind of looked at each other like, that's weird. And he looked at me and he said, are we still Pentecostal? And it's so funny because I don't know if they just don't have a clue that the notes in that are cessationist in nature. Like the whole Acts 2 thing is, Scofield's notes are not very pro-Pentecostal. Let's just put it that way. And in the Corinthians, and the gifts of the Spirit and stuff, that was a dispensation, and it ended with the death of the apostles. It ended with the death of Paul or John. With the death of
John died.
John, yeah.
And it was
it was over, right? So yeah, so that's the first big issue, and then the second issue is obviously the secret rapture that's presented in that model. And then the other thing is, and I know I keep coming back to this, but is the timeline.
Okay.
If the dispensationalists wanted to be literal, the timeline they were using is based off this vision in the book of Daniel about 70 weeks of 7.
Right.
Which marks the end of the Persian Empire. I think it's the Persian Empire sending the Jews back to Israel. There would be 70 weeks of 7, which is 490 years. And if you do the math on that, it ends right about the time of Jesus' crucifixion and ascension, right? Resurrection and ascension. It would have happened in that time period, okay? But the dispensationalists say, no, it hasn't happened yet. God has inserted a secret church age. So there's a secret rapture, and there's also a secret church age that only God knows the length of. And this is the era of grace, right? This is the period of grace. And so God is extending this to us, and God can make it as short or as long as he wants to. So they add a variable into the math. Now, hear me out. I'm actually not opposed to this just because it's a new thing, all right? I think God can give new revelation. I think every generation needs to have a new revelation of what the gospel is saying. A lot of people dismiss this. They just say things like, well, it's a fairly new belief. I don't care about that. Like, new beliefs probably need to be explored. Else, we kind of become irrelevant at some point. And now, I mean, my goodness, if you don't see that now with the writing on the wall with AI and virtual everything, I don't know what to tell you. Like, we're way past that mark, even with digital relationships and online dating and hookup culture. Episodes for another time. But like, all that is such a different, disembodied world that we're living in. And it needs fresh hermeneutic. It needs fresh eyes. So it's not because of that, but it's because of all the things we've talked about, okay? And then you come to the Israel issue, all right? And so for me, and you articulated it so well, the law and grace thing, I would disagree with you on the shedding of blood for remission of sins. And we can talk about that when we talk about salvation one day. But the imagery is there for sure. I just have a little different conclusion about it. But not relevant to this discussion. What is relevant is that you are exactly right. God's grace is in there. So I'm having weekly dinner with a guy. We've become friends, a man I met earlier this year, and we've become good friends. And he told me he wanted to know more about the Bible. And so we meet weekly, and we're literally going through it from front to end. And when we read Genesis, I have him read and come back with his questions. And so he came back, and he said, it was funny because I guess I'd never really thought about it, but he picked up on this. He said, Cain got away with murder. Like, Cain got away with murder. He got to go out, start a family. God marked him not to shame him, but to protect him. It wasn't eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And he was curious about that. Like, why was that? And I said, well, it's evidence very early on that grace is in continuity with the law, right? With the breaking of our own conscience even, right? That there's this, God is at work even now, okay? The fall has happened, but God is still at work. Okay. So, we can kind of see that, but it was really cool for him to make that connection and for him to see that. And in the same way that law and grace are in continuity with one another, Israel's story and our story, and by ours, I mean the Christian story, primarily from a Gentile perspective, because I don't have a Jewish background at all in my family. So I'm as Gentile as they come. And I went to a barbecue the other day, and after the prayer, I announced, I've come to be a good Gentile, and I ate copious amounts of pork and beans. So I was a good Gentile. But this is, and you hit it on the head. It starts in Romans 3, and it's funny because the dispensationalists read Romans 9 through 11 as though this is God doing with national Israel now, right? Like God dealing with this new nation that has been formed in 1948, which dispensationalists believe is the fulfillment of Jesus's prophecy that when the fig leaf brings forth leaves, the coming of the Son of Man. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, so they read that as like, Paul saying, okay, now church, time out. Let's talk about Israel now. But it's really not that. It's that Paul is himself as a Jew processing it himself in real time to us. And Romans 9 through 11 is trying, because he saw the writing on the wall, like Marcionism, like there'll be this this possibility that these Gentile churches, when you start getting into Rome and Greece and Eastern Asia or Western Asia, that these new churches, they might begin to think that God didn't care about the Jews. And if God didn't care about them, then what about the stories of the Jews? Because the stories, the scriptures, all pointed to the Messiah in Paul's imagination. So Paul is saying, he's kind of built this case, and then he gets to 9 through 11, and he's saying, God is not done with the Jews. God is faithful. That's really what it's all about. It's about the faithfulness of God. Because if God can be done with the Jews, then it can be done with us at any time.
Exactly.
He could just, wash his hands of this and move on. And the message of Paul is that if there is a monolithic message of the Bible, which I think is dangerous to say, because we don't want to over-flatten the text and the complexities of Scripture. But if there is a monolithic message, it's the message that God is at work saving us from our sins and from ourselves in many ways, and from the consequences of our sins and our choices. Not that we still don't have them. We always reap what you sow, but sometimes you reap what you don't sow, and that's grace. That's just where, you have this kind of step in. So working backward from that, so you got the Scofield Bible, the Israel thing, and then the third thing, and maybe this will be kind of a precursor to our next episode, and maybe we can dive in a little deeper next time on this one. But then the third piece of this puzzle for me is that what it does to apocalyptic literature is, and you kind of hit on this too, is that the bulk of the scriptures then become to people who aren't us. And so we kind of relegate the apocalypse, Revelation primarily, and Jesus' apocalypse, and Mark has a version of it. Matthew and Luke both have a version of the apocalypse. One could argue the entire book of John is a metaphor of the apocalypse. So it's all in there, but we miss what's actually happening in those texts. We miss the critique of empire that's happening in those texts, which is so important for the church to understand, because one of the biggest threats to the faith is it getting wed with empire. And it's empire power is the leaven that leavens the entire loaf of our faith, because power requires domination, it requires violence, it requires manipulation, right? In some way or another. Maybe if it doesn't require it, the temptation is much larger. With more power becomes more responsibility, and the more narrow that power gets, the less those people take responsibility. Right? Yes. With much power comes much responsibility. Yeah. So we miss that, right? We miss the point that Revelation is John. I mean, writing, in some ways you read it's almost like a political cartoon where he's just poking fun at the empire, these big beasts that can't even defeat a little lamb, these violent systems that can't overcome the peace of the lamb, right? And we miss also the historical context of what was happening in Israel when these texts were written, with the fall of Jerusalem and what was actually happening there. And you miss out an opportunity to really see these critiques of violence that are happening in the text, because violence is being critiqued a lot by Jesus. It's being critiqued a lot by the early church, and it's being critiqued a lot in the book of Revelation. And then, you got characters like Rene Girard, who is one of my theological heroes. You'll hear a lot about him in this podcast. I think he was spot on in his theory of mimetic theory. And I think that when we read Revelation, the beauty of it is that it's for generation after generation. And I think that's the promise of it. It's those things that were and are and will be, because we are running these cycles of violence in our political systems and in our societies. I really do believe that. And I think that those cycles repeat and repeat and repeat. And we're learning little by little. But I think that until we really learn that redemptive violence is not the way of the cross, and it's not the way that God is redeeming the world, we'll continue to repeat those cycles. And so, that's kind of where I see it. But, coming clean and telling people you don't believe in this stuff anymore is really big. And it's a way they really control political. It's a way the church systems really control thinking in a lot of ways, because it keeps that anxiety level on high. This imminent return, don't mess up, don't step out of line. If, one blink of an eye, because he's coming in the blink of an eye, and you might not even know it, and then you're left to hell on earth to get your head cut off if you don't take the mark of the beast. And it's super terrifying, and it controls a lot of people's mindset.
Well, and,
Yeah.
and not only as far as the apocalypse goes, right? You have a fight with your wife and you get hit by a bus. I don't know. In Argentina, everybody gets hit by a bus. I don't know what it is in the U.S., but you have a fight with your wife and you step out and get hit by a bus. And
Right.
where do you go? Do you go to heaven or do you go to hell, right? So, I mean, it's something that is like, okay, wasn't there a passage? I think I read somewhere that perfect love casts out all fear. I'm not sure, but I think I read
I
it.
believe that's in the good book, brother. I think it's in the good book, brother. I do. Yeah.
But we do see this kind of just riffing off of what you said, and I know we're out of time. But and I'm sorry for taking up all the time, but I think it's kind of necessary that we go into that, and that way we have a better understanding of what we're talking about when we start to talk about it. Is that you talk about Rene Girard.
Renee Girard.
Renard Girard. I don't.
We're going from Spanish to English to French.
It's difficult, guys. I'm sorry.
I feel you, man.
But we do see this movement, and it's very. I mean, because I study philosophy in a macro sense, and looking at it from 10,000 feet in the air, right? It's like we go from modernism to postmodernism, and the answer to get out of that, I posit, is transmodernism, but the popular solution is not transmodernism, it's pre-modernism. So it's like what defines pre-modernism? You talk about these cycles of violence. What defines pre-modernism is tribalism. And we start to see that all over the place in the church today. If you're not voting for the right party, or if you are praying for the Palestinians, right? You must not be a Christian. Okay, but that's a tribal view. That's not a Christian view. Right. So these ideologies, these mini ideologies like dispensationalism inside of the script, inside of the denominations, which I must say, and this is what I'm going to get off my chest, because, okay, first of all, I don't believe in a secret rapture, because I think the scriptures are pretty clear about the rapture in itself. You may not even believe in a rapture. But I believe in a rapture. I just don't believe it's before the tribulation. It's kind of hard to have martyrs if there are no believers, right? So that's one of the seals, right? So if you have martyrs, you have church. If the Antichrist persecutes the church, how will he do so if there is no church? And I had somebody argue with me that the people would be saved only by their keeping of the law. And I'm like, that just blows my mind. I'm just like, okay, brother, we're done. I mean, it's always been by Jesus. You're never saved by works. Paul's pretty clear about that, and he's a Jew. I mean, if there was a proponent to say, hey, let's go with the law, it should have been Paul, but Paul had the revelation of Christ. And what we're finding is this. We're finding basically like what we had in Acts 15 in the first council. We have factions. We have small groups and tribes that are kind of hashing it out.
Right.
Right. So
yeah, that's what he's addressing. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think you're spot on with that on Rene Girard. I fear we don't have enough time to go into it, but
Yeah,
you
but I
definitely.
think and I think leading into the next episode, this is a good place to kind of maybe let this sit and come back, because I would like to talk with you more about, is there still a tribulation that's supposed to happen, and what are we waiting on? Because I am currently, and again, I'm not an expert. We said at the beginning of this, I'm not an expert. This is just like, listen, I've got theological education. I've studied this stuff my whole life. I've been in ministry. I love this stuff. I'll be the first to admit there's a lot I don't know, and a lot of it is in process. And that's one of the dangers in saying things out loud, because then you kind of, people accept it as like concretized, right? Like a clip can live on forever and ever and ever. But so I'm in process on this. But I don't know that I necessarily am looking for anything else really to happen. I do believe Jesus is going to return. I believe it will be a bodily return. And I believe that we will meet him and usher him into the world to rule and reign. But to me, I read the scriptures very differently. Like, I'm not looking for anything else. And that's why, like, even the whole, like, a preterist, by the way, a preterist is someone who believes that the second coming has already happened, right? Like that it happened in, the fall of Jerusalem, like the apocalypse happened. There's even, I didn't know this. When I wrote this blog, I had people message me, and this one guy sent me this like whole thing. There's like secret rapture preterists that believe that the church was like secretly raptured then.
And then who are
which kind of blew my mind. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't listen. It was so much material. I was like, I don't have time to study this. But there are people out there that have put in a lot of time articulating an argument for this. I mean, this guy travels around and does debates with like big names about this. And I didn't even know that it existed. So anyway, lots of food for thought. And I think people are genuinely interested in it. There's always an interest about these things. We kind of want to know. And I understand it. It's very intriguing. And it's not like I think that's a bad thing. We talk about the novels being popular and stuff. There is a human curiosity about it, and about where things are headed. And especially when things get shaky, like they are right now, globally and here in the States. There's just a shaking going on. I don't know how you don't feel it. How you interpret it, whether it's good or bad, may vary, but we all, I think, feel it in some way. So people are curious about it, but the old models just aren't, they just don't work. Like, they don't really work to answer the existential questions that we're facing right now.
Like, they worked when they were born, right? I mean, things were falling into place, and it seemed like these people had it down. But Jesus was very specific about it. He said, no man knows the day or the hour.
No man knows. Right.
And so everything we're talking about is how we interpret it. So please don't take our word for it, but study it for yourself, because we believe that God does have revelation for each generation. And I think that's mainly what we're looking for in the podcast, Daniel.
Yes, amen. Yep.
Well, guys, it's been so much fun. I'm sorry to take do a short little masterclass on the history of premillennialism and dispensationalism, but I think it's going to be a good base so we can start talking about what we really want to talk about. And maybe that's something that you really want to talk about and you want to go deeper into. Let us know, because there's a lot more stuff to talk about inside of what we unpacked. We're just scratching the surface enough to define terms so that when we talk about them, everybody can follow along with us. That's all we're trying to do here. But if you enjoyed what we're talking about, you want to learn more, please help us with the channel. If you have other people you want to see this kind of content, put a like, write down a comment, share it with your other friends. That really helps the channel and make sure that YouTube knows we're getting content out there that's valid and relevant for the church. And that's what we're doing here. And Daniel doesn't get a cent from this. I don't get a cent from this. We're sitting down on a Sunday afternoon and we're talking because we think we have something to apport to the church. And that's all we're trying to do. So we're trying to be a blessing to you guys. Please be a blessing to us. Give us a like, give us a comment, share on your socials. And we can't wait to see you next week.